Hi, good morning, and welcome to the broadcast of our Facebook page of the worship service here. I hope that this is a meaningful time for you and for your family as we gather together. There's a couple announcements that I want to bring to your attention, if I may, before I have the opening words. The Martin Luther King Celebration Committee and the Low Country Coalition Against Hate has organized a protest today that's to meet at 5:45 in Bluffton at Eagles Field, which is the corner of Bluffton Parkway and Bluffton Parkway and Buck Island. Again, to make our public statement and protest of the death of George Floyd and others that have been racking our nation. We'll gather at 5:45. This will consist of a parade of cars and signs on the outside. George Canuck, who is our connection to both of these organizations, has sent a message that he believes this will be a peaceful protest, but it will simply be a parade of cars, signs on the outside, stating our distaste and our frustration with the injustices that we continue to experience in our world. Again, this is the protest that will be in Bluffton at Eagles Field, which is at the corner of Bluffton Parkway and Buck Island, organized by the Martin Luther King Celebration Committee and also members of the Low Country Coalition Against Hate. This congregation is a part of both of those, and I hope that you'll be able to be there, if not in spirit, physically, that we might be able to make our statement in the world. The other thing I want to be able to offer to you, if I can, is the way that we gather ourselves together. And I'd like to offer these opening words from Wayne B. Arneson. He writes, "We come together today seeking a reality beyond our narrow selves that binds us in compassion, love, and understanding to other human beings and to the interdependent web of all living things. May our hearts and minds be open to the power and the insight that weave together the scattered threads of our experience and help us remember the wholeness with a capital W, the wholeness of which we are a part." Thank you.
We will now have our lighting of our chalice, and we encourage each of you who are joining our service by video to light your own candle or chalice in your home. Whether you're watching live or later, we can find our spirits united by this simple action until we're together again. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life that we share together. And I'm Ann Harrison. I'm the Director of Religious Education here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Low Country here in Bluffton, South Carolina. And I thought that I would talk with you this morning about a ritual that is celebrated in Unitarian Universalist congregations all over the world, mostly in the spring, which we call the Flower Communion. The service, the Flower Communion, was created by a man named Norbert Chapek in the early 1920s. And he was the man who founded the Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia. He was looking for a symbolic ritual that would bind the members of his church together, something similar to the traditional Christian communion that is done in the Catholic Church with bread and wine. Norbert Chapek was studying for his PhD in New York City when he met his wife, Maya. And she was the one who convinced him to leave the Baptist ministry and become a Unitarian. Together, they returned to Czechoslovakia and they started a very liberal church in Prague, Unitarian Church. And Maya was ordained as a Unitarian minister in 1926. And although Norbert Chapek started the Flower Communion, it was actually his wife, Maya, who brought it back to our country. In 1940, while she was on a tour of the United States, she introduced the Flower Communion to the Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The sad part of this story is that World War II broke out while she was here in the United States, and Maya was unable to ever return to Prague. The even sadder part is that after the war was over, Maya learned that her husband, Norbert, had died in a Nazi concentration camp. The Nazi court records show that Dr. Čapek's belief of the inherent worth and beauty of every human person was, in quotes, what they wrote, too dangerous for him to be allowed to live. So he was taken to Dachau. The beautiful part of this story, though, is that the flower communion that they started lives on. And like I said, it's a ritual that is celebrated in Unitarian Universalist congregations all over the world. And the way that it worked was that on the last Sunday before summer, people were asked to bring a flower to church. The flower would come from anywhere. It would come from their garden, a meadow, the roadside. And when they got to church, they were asked to put their flower in a big vase. Having each person put their own flower in signified them joining all the others by their own free will. Then all the flowers together symbolized the church community being united. Then I believe the older children in the church would arrange the bouquet and carry the vase up front. Dr. Čapek would say a prayer and bless the flowers, and then the kids would carry the vase back out. After the service was over, as the people were leaving, they would go to the vase, and each one would take a flower home with them, other than the one that they had brought. And the meaning behind this is that no two flowers are alike, just as no two people are alike. Yet each one has a contribution to make. Together, the different flowers form a beautiful bouquet. And the bouquet would not be the same without the unique addition of each individual flower, which is the same with the people in our community. It would not be the same without each and every one of us. Each person takes home a flower brought by someone else, which symbolizes a communion, which is a community sharing. The way this service was originally done, way back when, is much like the way we do it here at UUCL every year. But this year is different, as we're trying to protect one another by not meeting on Sunday mornings. So I'm going to suggest that we still celebrate the flower communion, but we just do it a little differently. And one way would be, pick a time this week and ask everyone in your family to gather a flower and bring it in, perhaps in silence, to a vase in a special place that you've set up in your home. If you live alone, you could gather flowers, and as you place them in the vase, you could say the name of each person that they represent, people who are significant in your life, whether they are living or whether they've passed away. When Norbert Čapek would bless the flowers, he would say these words: "O infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of thy most precious gifts, and may we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world." And whether you say these words, or whether you make up your own, or speak no words at all, it is something that we could all be doing from our own individual homes, something that we would be doing together. Now, if you send the words you say, or the pictures of you with your flowers, to David at the church, he probably could put them on the weekly email, and we can share in that way too. Our flower communion is a simple, meaningful celebration of the beauty in this earth and the oneness of our humanity, perhaps needed now more than ever. And as I gathered my flowers from my garden this morning, I thought of all of you, and I miss you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Hi, Charlie again. I have a message that I want to try and bring to you today. I hope I'm able to do it. My mind is in a number of different places as I think about the topic and the issue of acceptance as far as the third principle that we celebrate in Unitarian Universalism. But before I go further about the topic of acceptance, I want to be able to say quite clearly that 100,000 dead is not acceptable. The deaths of Ahmaud Arbery is not acceptable. The death of George Floyd is not acceptable. And so while we might be able to think about and talk about acceptance of one another, there are things in our world that we cannot accept, and these are some of them. They line up by the thousands, but I do want you to be able to hear that from me as I continue to talk about acceptance. And in order to try and get our hearts and our heads and our souls around these tragic times and days, I'm going to take just a moment for silence and ask you that we might be able to unite our spirits and hearts together as we think both about the beauty of flowers and as well the horrid tragedies that are in this world. So let's join our hearts for just a moment of silence if we can. Thank you. It seems odd that silence is an act of rebellion, but in this day and age it is and must be. And we'll also find ways to allow our voices to be heard so that we might continue to make a difference in our world and a change that's worth having. Last week, Nancy Forrester spoke to us about the unacceptedness of a certain spiritual circle that she was in as she began to reveal her own sexual identity and how she was rejected by that circle and how she found acceptance here in the Unitarian Universalist congregation of the Low Country. And that was the way that she began to unpack acceptance for us. And I want to try and take that again just a little bit further. I think she has some very significant things to say. The Sunday before that, I began looking at this particular principle as I was beginning to talk about spirituality, not just acceptance, but about spirituality. But to remind you, and I'm going to be leaning on the 7 Principles in Word and Worship. I don't know if you can see that or not. This is a cool little book that I've begun to try and work with. There are 7 principles, of course, that are important to us and critical to us. Let me just kind of walk you through them real quick. The first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The second principle is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. That's certainly significant for our world today. The third principle that we've been unpacking for the last couple weeks is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I'll come back to that in just a moment. The fourth principle that we'll start to look at next month is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The fifth principle is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. The sixth principle is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And the seventh principle is respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. Last week, or for the last couple of weeks, we've been taking a hard look at the third principle, which is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And I chose to look at the back half of that for a brief period of time as we talked about spiritual growth. And I had suggested that there's 3 different ways that we kind of think about our spirituality, think about being in the world. One of them, of course, if you might remember, is linearly, point A to point B, day to day, the way we live our lives. We understand that that's the way we can think about things and keep our lives organized and orderly. And the second way I suggested that we begin to think is as we mature past and evolve past just thinking linearly, we also begin to understand that the things that we think, do, say, be in our world impacts others around us. And so we begin to realize that it's not just point to point that we're living, but we live in a world that begins to unpack itself and begins to ripple outward. The things that we say impact other people's lives, impact our own lives, and those words continue to move out 360 degrees around us. And also, as I began to ask us to think differently about thinking, is I began to suggest that not only do we look at our world 360 degrees, but we also are thinking spherically, that we are in the center of something that's expanding. And that's really where spirituality begins to flesh itself out, begins to make itself broader, bigger, bolder, is when we can begin to realize that we're really in the center of something. And in that center, we have an infinite number, not just an infinite number of degrees on a flat line, but an infinite number of ways to think and say and be and do in the center of the sphere of our thinking. And we talked about that, and I had some very positive comments from many of you about that. I'm continuing to try and work that out in my own life. And if you think I do that well, I don't, but I'm working on it. I hope you are too. And the more I began to come back to the first part of this third principle, the more I began to realize that acceptance of one another really is spherically thinking. We really begin to expand ourselves as we begin to consider how we might be able to accept one another, or even accept ourselves. That's the place we have to begin. If we can't accept ourselves, there's no way we can accept anybody else in our life. And so the first challenge is to begin to look how to expand your own acceptance of who you are as a human being, the things that you do that are flawed, the things that you do that are perfect, those things that you want to make stronger, those things that are weak in your life. All of those is a part of acceptance of oneself as you begin to accept those around you. I can't tell you how important that concept of acceptance is in our own world. I titled this message, "The Power of Acceptance is in the Posture We Take with the People in Our Lives." Because you see, I've discovered in my life and in my world, and often in the work that I do, is the process of accepting someone is not just the words, but very often it's the body language that I offer someone too, the body language that someone offers me that says, you're safe here, you're okay here. I'm not here to change you. I have an infinite curiosity about who you are as a human being, and I want to know that about you and offer that to you. And that process, whether it's the way I use my words, or it's the way I might hold my head or my body in front of another person as I'm inviting them into my life and inviting them to offer themselves to me, there's a tremendous power in the way that we do that. Now, I realize I'm talking to a bunch of Unitarians, and so you guys live and breathe acceptance. This is preaching to the choir, quite literally. At the same time, I think it's something that we can sort of let get past if we're not careful. We might become a little, apathetic about it. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand is acceptance is not the same as apathy. Not caring is not the same as not caring. Caring is very critical to our health as who we are as a human being, to the world that we live in, the people that are around us. And I'd like to suggest to you that acceptance is the key to living and thinking from the center of a sphere. That's the way we begin to expand ourselves. As I was considering that, I did get a copy of this book, and it's been very helpful for me to think and understand. But I want to read something to you that I found sort of unexpected concerning this particular topic and this particular principle. It comes from the chapter that talks about a Dr. Loomer's understanding of spirituality. He was the First Unitarian Church of Berkeley, California, and on Sundays after church he would lead these thought-provoking theological conversations. And one of the things that he asked, and one of the things that he describes, is how do you know what's the size of your soul? What is, he says, the size of your soul? And by size, he means the capacity of a person's soul, the range and the depth of his love, his capacity for relationships. He talks about the volume of life you can take into being and still maintain your own integrity and individuality. The intensity and variety of outlook you can entertain in the unity of your being without feeling defensive or insecure. And as I began to read these words and understand these words, I began to realize that what Professor Loomer was talking about was how we size out our soul from the center out and to press it out. how we take into ourselves others' lives and invite them into our own and us into theirs. And that's one of the ways that I think acceptance begins to press itself out, begins to make itself larger in our own soul as we entertain these things without losing the integrity to be able to say that 100,000 dead are not acceptable. George Floyd's death is not acceptable. We can't accept that, and yet know that we're able to take others into our own hearts and into our own souls. I believe it's true that acceptance is the key to living and thinking in the center of that sphere. And we need to be asking ourselves, what's the size of my own soul? Is it expanding as others enter into it, as I take my curiosity and ask questions about who people are and what they're about? I can't remember if I mentioned this to you guys recently, but I am incredibly curious about other people in their lives, and I look for subtle clues about someone that might be inviting me into their life, whether they're asking those or not. One of the things that I enjoy doing is keeping an eye out for people's unusual tattoos. I usually take a tattoo as an invitation to ask a question. Sometimes it's ignored. Sometimes people go with it. I was talking to a waitress recently. I saw on the inside of her wrist a name that had been tattooed, and I said, "Can you tell me about that? What's that mean? Who's that about?" "Oh, that's my daughter," she said, and she began to unpack her daughter's life in front of me. It was just a delightful conversation. And the fact that I cared enough and showed it enough to her, that she began to take some great joy just in the casual meeting we had. It wasn't a long relationship. Probably won't ever see her again. If I go back to this restaurant, I'll certainly be looking for her. But that's the things that draw my attention to it. There was another young lady years and years ago. I was in a truck stop in a little town I lived in, and a woman was waiting on me behind a fast food counter, and she had some initials on her knuckles. And I asked her about it, and she turned it around, and she saw, I could see that it was the word Bill, B-I-L-L. And I said, "Where's Bill now?" And she said, "He's not." Yeah, it happens sometimes, doesn't it? And we had a moment together where we could laugh about a frayed relationship that just kind of came out through a conversation over a fast food counter in a small truck stop in a small town in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina. But this understanding of acceptance is everything. Acceptance, I have found, can be transforming in life. It can transform a life. It can transform your life. And this transformation is so very critical in a meaningful life that we live, finding meaning in our life, to be able to grant someone the luxury of being open and transparent just for a moment, even if they step out of your life instantaneously, they were in your life for a time. And that transformation can really change you too, changes me. Most of you know that I'm a full-time chaplain with Hospice Care of the Low Country. I like to call myself the spiritual coordinator. That word chaplain has a number of different meanings to a number of different people, not all of it positive. And of course, there's this whole Charlie Chaplin thing that I always have to live down as I get to know people. But there's a letter from me that I send out to our new patients and their families. And that letter says, "I'm not here to change you. I'm not here to rearrange you. I'm not here to suggest that wherever you are in your life that you're wrong, and I'm going to help you get to a better place. That's just not my deal. I'm here rather to join you and to walk side by side with you and your family for a period of time if you'll let me. It doesn't matter whether you're strongly involved as leadership in a traditional Christian church, whether you're a Jew or whether you are Islamic, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic. None of those things matter. That's not what I'm about. I'm not about an agenda. I'm about joining with you in your journey." And I do my best to try and communicate that, and the nurses that go in front of me before I get there, I try and communicate that as well through that letter that we have and make offer. And sometimes I find that that's a healthy way to begin a relationship with someone, especially when you're kind of parachuted into their life in the middle of a very difficult and emotional and tragic situation. But those are the things that I find to be so significant in my life, not just about the words, but also about the body language that we bring to it and how I communicate and how we communicate with each other. And you know, many of you are very, very good at sending those signals, either verbally or with your body language. And many of you have invited me to open my heart to you, and I've taken that invitation. And I've always been thankful for that kind of heart and that kind of spirit. But you need to know that it makes a difference when you can do that in this world. It makes a difference when you can do that to a stranger across the street, a stranger as you're standing 6 feet away in line at the grocery store, or perhaps pumping gas. Just to be able to let people know and to say that and to share that with you. And that as that sacred space begins to expand inside of you and inside of them as you invite them in, you need to know that at that very moment, you're really in the presence of the divine. However you might be thinking about the nature of God, whether it's the same God that I might have an understanding of, I'm persuaded that whatever the belief system is that's behind it, as you begin to invite that individual into your life, and they begin to invite you into theirs, you're on sacred ground there. You're in sacred territory. That's where you and the divine meet together in that way that's unique to both of you, unique to each of you. And whatever your concept of God might be, the divine lives in that space. And that's the sacred space of trust. I can't tell you how important and significant trust is in any relationship. Every relationship. Every one that you have is about acceptance. If there isn't any acceptance in your life of the people that are in your life, those that love you, those that you love, if there's not acceptance, then it's only performance. And there's a radical difference between acceptance and performance. In performance, you spend all of your days and all of your time trying to figure out how to please the person that's across from you, how to make them happy with you, rather you be content with yourself. It's about figuring out what's the rules and how do I do this and how do I make a meaningful relationship happen. Instead, the amazing thing starts to fall away as performance ceases when acceptance drives that relationship. When there's an understanding of who that person is in front of you, that is where there's freedom and kind of intimacy, again, whether it lasts just for a moment in line at BILO or whether it's the person that you spend all of your days with. My goodness, acceptance is so critical to life. It's so critical to who you are. And again, I understand that I'm speaking to a bunch of Unitarians who understand what acceptance is, so they want to live it out. But I just want to underscore it, highlight it, put an exclamation mark beside it, maybe a star, that we might be able to realize that's really what makes life worth living, is we can find ways to be acceptable to ourselves first, and then accept others around us. So I hope that me just mentioning these words so many times and coming back to this is that the power of acceptance is the posture we take with other people, whether it's in our words or whether it's in our body language, that we really do make a difference with each other. I'm Charlie Tyler. Thanks for listening. I hope this has been meaningful to you today. Thank you.
One, two, three, four.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John. That was beautiful. You can feel the peace in this place as we connected with those chords and those notes. I want to come back to another reading. I shared this with you all recently. Again, Gretchen Haley is the author of these closing words, and the title is Surrender to This Life. And she writes this. I think it's appropriate for us in these days in the pandemic as we're trying to figure out how to be, how to think, how to feel. She writes these words. She says, give up the fight for some other moment, for some other life than here and now. Give up the longing for some other world, the wishing for other choices to make, other songs to sing, other bodies, other ages, other countries, other stakes. Purge the past, forgive the future, for each come too soon. Surrender only to this life, this day, this hour, not because it does not constantly break your heart, but because it beckons with beauty and startles with delight. If only we keep waking up. This is the gift we've been given, these body clothes, this heartbreak, this pulse, this breath, this light, these friends, this hope. Here we remember ourselves, all a part of it all, giving thanks together. Thank you.
The words for extinguishing our flame are in your order of service, and let's say them together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.